Back in the day, when you rolled into a motorway services and saw rows of ERFs, Fodens, and the odd Scammel, DAF wasn't exactly the star of the show. It was just another European badge trying to wedge its way into a scene dominated by homegrown giants. British hauliers were proud, local, loyal, and for years, Dutch-built trucks were treated a bit like posh foreign exchange students. Clever maybe, but not one of us. But DAF didn't just show up once and hope for the best. It kept showing up, kept improving, kept listening, and slowly, very slowly, it started turning heads. See, the thing about DAF is that they never tried to be flashy. No wild horsepower battles like Scania, no brutalistic styling like Volvo's older boxers. What they offered was dependability, comfort, practicality, and bit by bit, as British firms started to face the reality of rising costs, tighter emissions rules, and brutal EU competition, those things began to matter more than flag waving. One of the earliest shifts came when DAF partnered with Leyland, not as a takeover at first, but more like a strategic handshake. Leyland was clinging on after decades of political interference and corporate mergers that left the brand more confused than a Saturday night sat-nav. And DAF? Well, they saw potential. British manufacturing muscle, local familiarity, and access to a fleet buying market that still leaned heavily towards buying home-built. So, the two teamed up in the mid-1980s and gave birth to a range of trucks that felt familiar, even if they weren't purely British. The 95 series, for example, that was a game changer. While it had Dutch engineering at its core, it was assembled in the UK, spec'd for British roads, and designed to meet the demands of local operators who'd grown tired of underpowered, overcomplicated lorries that rattled your bones before lunchtime. The cab was wide, the visibility was excellent, and the whole thing felt modern. Not over-engineered, just thoughtfully built. And that's where DAF started to make its move, through comfort. British truckers who'd spent years in cramped tin boxes were suddenly handed roomy cabs with proper bunks, usable storage, and insulation that actually worked. It wasn't glamorous, but it mattered, especially for long-distance drivers running 5 nights out. Then came the 85 and 75 series, lighter, more flexible models that were perfect for regional haulage and distribution work. DAF didn't try to sell you a dream, they sold you a truck that worked, easy to maintain, fuel efficient, reliable, and as British firms started to buckle under economic pressure, those boxes ticked louder than ever. Now here's where it gets interesting. When Leyland collapsed financially, which everyone saw coming, let's be honest, most assumed that'd be the end of the partnership. But DAF, they didn't walk away, they doubled down. In 1993, after Leyland DAF went into receivership, DAF NV was restructured and Leyland Trucks was bought out by its own management team, with continued supply links to DAF in the Netherlands. This is where DAF proved they weren't just another outsider. They stayed, they kept production alive in Lancashire, kept local jobs, kept putting British assembled trucks on British roads, and over time they earned something no foreign badge had really managed before: trust. Through the late 90s and early 2000s, while other truck makers fought over horsepower arms races or tried to reinvent the wheel with computers and tech gimmicks, DAF kept refining the basics. They nailed cab design, improved gearboxes, made their parts network strong and predictable, and slowly but surely, hauliers from Newcastle to Newquay began filling their yards with those wide-nosed, practical DAFs that just worked. By the time the XF series rolled in, DAF wasn't an underdog anymore. It was a heavyweight. The XF 105 became a staple on British motorways, comfortable, quiet, capable of covering miles without breaking a sweat, and most importantly, available in right-hand drive with local dealer support and UK-trained mechanics who knew how to fix them without needing a PhD. DAF also nailed fleet support. They didn't just sell trucks, they sold packages, finance, maintenance, breakdown cover. And for companies that needed to keep margins razor thin, that mattered. It wasn't romantic, it wasn't patriotic, but it was smart business. And let's not forget driver loyalty. Ask a seasoned British trucker what cab they'd rather sleep in, a rattly old ERF or a smooth, insulated XF with space to sit upright and a night heater that actually works. And the answer becomes clear. The days of roughing it for pride were fading. Comfort was king. As the 2000s kicked in, DAF wasn't just playing catch-up anymore. They'd already taken over the yard. From local builders merchants to long-haul logistics giants, DAF had become the go-to truck. Not because it was the flashiest, but because it just got the job done. No fuss, no drama, and more importantly, no surprise downtime. For fleet managers, that was gold. And here's the thing, while other brands kept shifting their focus to European highways or chasing global export markets, DAF doubled down on the UK. They studied the roads, listened to drivers, tuned their suspension for potholes, roundabouts, and loading docks that weren't designed for modern-day Arctics. The result? Trucks that felt local, even if they had Dutch DNA. The XF range, especially the XF95 and later the 105, became absolute legends in their own right. You could drive one from Dover to Dundee and feel just as fresh climbing out as when you got in. The seats were spot on, the steering never felt floaty, and visibility, top tier. It wasn't trying to be a showpiece, it was a trucker's truck, rugged, reliable, and ready for whatever the A1 threw its way. Now, let's talk about what really sealed the deal: dealer support. DAF's parts network in the UK is still one of the strongest going. Need a part in Glasgow by morning? No problem. Breakdown outside Cardiff? A local DAF team is probably already within a few miles. While other makes were faffing about with centralized systems and EU lead times, DAF had boots on the ground. British boots. It's that kind of grassroots thinking that won them the loyalty of operators big and small. Eddie Stobart, for example, one of the most iconic names in UK haulage, ran a massive number of DAFs through the late 2000s and into the 2010s. And if Eddie's rolling your gear up and down the M6, you're officially part of the British trucking landscape. But DAF didn't stop there. They kept evolving carefully. When emission standards tightened, DAF didn't go overboard with complexity. They introduced Euro 6 compliant engines that were clean, yes, but still serviceable without needing an IT degree. Mechanics didn't have to battle with 10 different diagnostic computers or strip down half the cab to change a filter. It made life easier, and in haulage, easy is underrated, and they knew how to look after drivers too. Every new iteration of the XF came with improved storage, better lighting, more power outlets, small things that meant everything on a 6-day run. The XF Super Space Cab practically became a second home for thousands of British truckers. You could sleep, eat, stretch, and even stand up properly without feeling like you were trapped in a biscuit tin. For owner-operators, that was enough to seal the deal. Even when rivals came gunning, when Scania brought out luxury V8s or Volvo packed its cabs with Scandinavian polish, DAF stood firm. They weren't trying to win a fashion contest. They were focused on value, uptime, and keeping their customers happy. And in an industry where margins are tighter than ever, that's what kept them on top. And here's a mad stat. By the mid-2000s, DAF was topping the UK registration charts year after year. That's not just success, that's dominance. They weren't just holding a seat at the table, they'd taken the head chair, passed around the tea, and written the rules. They even managed to pull this off without losing their connection to Leyland. Production of right-hand drive DAFs continues in the UK to this day. That's rare. Most manufacturers packed up shop years ago and moved everything to Central Europe or further, but DAF kept a foot firmly in Lancashire, which meant when you bought British, you still got some British. It's also why DAF trucks still carry that badge with pride. Walk around any UK truck stop and count the number of XF and CF units. You'll see them in every colour, hauling every kind of load. Tippers, reefers, bulk tankers, flatbeds, doesn't matter. DAFs are everywhere. And the drivers? Ask them what they think. Most won't give you a song and dance. They'll just say, yeah, she's solid. And honestly, that's the highest praise you can get.